October 26. In a letter, Castro urges Khrushchev for an immediate nuclear strike in the event of a U.S. invasion of Cuba.
If they manage to carry out an invasion of Cuba, then that would be the moment to eliminate this danger forever, in an act of the most legitimate self-defense. However harsh and terrible the solution, there would be no other.
Despite Castro's demands, Khrushchev sends President Kennedy a message with a more conciliatory tone.
Mr. President, you and I should not now pull on the ends of the rope in which you have tied the knot of war. If there is no intention to tighten that knot and thereby to doom the world to the catastrophe of thermonuclear war, then let us not only relax the forces pulling on the ends of the rope, let us take measures to untie that knot. We are ready for this.
Khrushchev offers to remove the missiles from Cuba in return for a U.S. guarantee that Cuba will not be invaded. Kennedy is reluctant to issue an immediate response to the letter, cautious of traps hidden within its wording. Intelligence teams analyze the message overnight to prepare for a response in the morning. U.S. strategic bombers, armed with nuclear weapons, remain airborne 24 hours a day. The United States is poised to attack at a moment's notice. Midnight Friday, the eve of what presidential advisor Theodore Sorensen would call the worst day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, also known as Black Saturday. Premier Khrushchev delivers a radio address with an offer to the U.S. that conflicts with the previous one. There is an additional demand: the removal of U.S. missiles from Turkey. For the president and his advisors, the new proposal adds an additional layer of complexity to the situation, not the least of which is the public airing of the offer, which makes it more difficult for the U.S. to refuse such a seemingly reasonable deal. It also raises questions about who is actually in control at the Kremlin. Recordings from the ExComm sessions reveal disagreement between the president and every single one of his advisors on how to address the different Soviet messages. ExComm members insist that the president disregard the second offer and refuse to make any concessions. Kennedy tries to find a way to respond to both offers, with a calculated blend of compromise and deflection that seeks to resolve the immediate situation in Cuba before attending to the additional Soviet demands. Suddenly, a new incident threatens to derail diplomatic efforts. A U-2 is shot down over Cuba, killing Major Rudolf Anderson. The chances of a Cuban anti-aircraft gun destroying the plane are next to zero. It is almost certain that the Soviet SAMs knocked down the aircraft. U.S. military leaders urged the president to immediately retaliate with airstrikes. But Kennedy suspects the missile launch was against direct orders from Khrushchev. Adding to the tension, the Soviets conduct a nuclear test, while the U.S. conducts tests of its own. Both sides seem to be demonstrating their willingness to use these terrifying weapons to resolve their differences once and for all. New reports arrive at the White House that additional U.S. aircraft have been fired upon while on reconnaissance flights. Kennedy again refuses to retaliate. Military leaders call for massive airstrikes against Cuba by Monday morning unless irrefutable evidence surfaces that the weapons have been dismantled. Meanwhile, 3 Navy destroyers chase a Soviet submarine, dropping practice depth charges in an attempt to force it to surface. They are unaware that the submarine carries nuclear torpedoes. The incident nearly erupts into a deadly skirmish that could bring the nations one step closer to all-out war. At 7:45 p.m., a decision is reached at the White House. Robert Kennedy personally delivers a letter to Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin at 8:05 p.m. The president is willing to end the blockade and issue guarantees that the U.S. will not invade if the Soviet government dismantles its missile bases in Cuba. In return, Kennedy agrees to remove the missiles from Turkey within 6 months, but without public admission. This is a crucial aspect of the offer for the U.S. Robert Kennedy requests a Soviet response by Sunday. The meeting lasts no more than 15 minutes. The pressure on Khrushchev to reach a decision mounts. The U.S. deadline quickly approaches, and the Strategic Air Command is poised to launch a nuclear strike. The fate of the world as we know it hangs in the balance. Finally, the Soviets make their decision. With messages taking hours to send between Moscow and Washington, Khrushchev's response is publicly transmitted in a radio address to save time.
The Soviet government, in addition to previously issued instructions on the cessation of further work at the building sites for the weapons, has issued a new order on the dismantling of the weapons which you describe as offensive and their return to the Soviet Union.
The following is the text of President Kennedy's statement of noon. I welcome Chairman Khrushchev's statesmanlike decision to stop building bases in Cuba, dismantling offensive weapons, returning them to the Soviet Union under UN verification. This is an important and constructive contribution to peace.
Because of the key stipulation that the removal of the U.S. missiles from Turkey be kept secret, the Soviets appear to have backed down in the public eye. This aspect of the agreement would remain undisclosed for a quarter of a century. The President requests U.S. television networks downplay this apparent victory for the United States. Kennedy and the world can finally breathe easy. Nuclear war has been averted. The crisis has been diffused. But the slightest change in circumstances could have led to a very different outcome.